He has also voiced some concern that a court that has, he appointed 3 of the justices to the Supreme Court and it gave the conservatives a supermajority. He is concerned that they are going to look as if they're trying not to rule in his favor and might rule against him.
What do you say about that, Alina?
Yeah, that's a concern that he's voiced to me. He's voiced to everybody publicly, not privately. And I can tell you that his concern is a valid one. Republicans are conservative. They get nervous. They, unfortunately, are sometimes shy away from being pro-Trump because they feel that even if the law's on our side, they may be swayed much like the Democratic side would. Right? So they're trying so hard to look neutral that sometimes they make the wrong call. And I just encourage them to really look at the law and the Constitution. It's very clean cut, Martha. There's no politics that should be involved in this. It's just simply American. And if the justices read the law as I do, as most Americans and attorneys do, even Dershowitz, who's a known liberal, it's just a simple decision, and it should have nothing to do with if you're a Republican or a Democrat. So I don't know. It's Maggie. I'm a friend of Maggie's, even though we're on different sides of the coin. But she's right. The president's always concerned about people worrying about that.
All right, let's talk about attorney-client privilege and why when a lawyer goes on TV and talks about their communications with their client, that can be construed as a waiver of attorney-client privilege. So attorney-client privilege means that the communications between an attorney and their client shall remain confidential, provided that the communication is within the scope of their representation and consultation, that it is not being disclosed to third parties, and that it is not being used for a crime where the crime fraud exception applies. So assuming there are legitimate communications between an attorney and their client that cannot be discovered in a criminal case or a civil case or in any other context, it remains privileged, it remains confidential, and the attorney-client privilege is such a kind of sacrosanct privilege that even when there is a search warrant that is executed, for example, at Mar-a-Lago back in August of 2022, the Department of Justice has to send in what's referred to as a taint team, 2 separate teams, one team that's executing the search warrant and searching for the fruits of the poisonous tree, or searching for the criminal material, or in this case, the documents or the contraband or whatever else is the subject of the search warrant. But then a separate team is going in that very carefully handles anything that could be construed as attorney-client privilege, and that's separated. It's a whole nother team that pushes that aside, holds that aside, so that the team that's conducting the criminal investigation doesn't even have access to anything that can be construed as attorney-client privilege. But the reason I showed you that clip at the beginning of Alina Habba is Donald Trump and his lawyers repeatedly talk about their confidential communications publicly, and while that may seem normal because Trump's lawyers do it all the time, it isn't normal, and it actually has major legal consequences. So I want you to save this video right here because it may be very relevant in the next 60 days regarding other motions that are going to be filed in the Trump case in the Southern District of Florida, the Mar-a-Lago document case, because Donald Trump has previewed that he intends to file a motion to dismiss before Judge Eileen Cannon on the issue of vindictive prosecution, and specifically on the issue of the attorney-client privilege being breached. And Donald Trump claims that Special Counsel Jack Smith and his team seized confidential communications between Trump and his lawyer that they should never have had access to in the first place. Now, Donald Trump's argument is flawed for one major reason, specifically because any of the documents that were eventually turned over that could have been deemed attorney-client information came specifically from decisions that were made by a Washington, D.C. federal judge, Judge Beryl Howell, who was overseeing a grand jury that was investigating the crimes also by Donald Trump. And where there were issues about attorney-client privilege, there would be decisions by Judge Beryl Howell, a federal judge, or formerly the chief judge in Washington, D.C., about whether or not certain documents were subject to attorney-client privilege, or whether, for example, the crime fraud exception applied, whether Donald Trump was using legal representation in furtherance of his commission of crimes, whether or not the lawyer knew they were being used unwittingly or wittingly. That would be a waiver of attorney-client privilege. So that's how special counsel Jack Smith got certain documents. And you'll also recall, for example, in the federal case, the case involving the search warrant that was executed at Mar-a-Lago, where Judge Eileen Cannon had like a special master appear. Attorney-client documents were eventually separated from all the other documents at Mar-a-Lago. So Trump does not have a good argument on the issue of attorney-client privilege, but let me show you what Donald Trump is arguing right here. And then let me explain to you why Donald Trump's lawyers constantly talking about their communications with Donald Trump, I think is going to be used by special counsel Jack Smith in a future motion. So here's Donald Trump's opposition to a motion by special counsel Jack Smith for Donald Trump to disclose 60 days before the trial date in the Southern District of Florida Mar-a-Lago document case, if Donald Trump is going to utilize what's called an advice of counsel defense. Donald Trump has indicated that one of his main defenses in both cases is that he's going to blame his lawyers and throw his lawyers under the bus for why he committed crimes. But when you do that, that's another reason why attorney-client privilege is deemed waived. If you blame your lawyers for the reason that you committed crimes, the burden of production then goes on you, and then you have to produce the record showing your reliance on the lawyer essentially telling you to commit the crime. But one of the arguments Donald Trump makes in this opposition to disclosing whether or not he will be asserting an advice of counsel defense and thereby waiving attorney-client privilege is the following argument on page 6 of Donald Trump's motion filed a week ago. Trump goes, Trump will demonstrate through further motions that the special counsel's office has already unlawfully invaded his attorney-client privilege and compelled lawyers to testify before a grand jury in the District of Columbia. In the motion, the office special counsel's office curiously ignores this fact and fails to inform the court that they have much more information regarding legal advice provided to Trump than in a typical case. It is therefore disingenuous for the office to raise the specter of an ambush and argue that discovery about these matters is uniquely within the possession of the defendant. So, an odd argument that Donald Trump's lawyers are making there, but all of their arguments are odd. Odd is probably better than just completely patently frivolous. They act like special counsel Jack Smith just seized this attorney-client information in Washington, D.C. It was a federal judge ordered that be turned over with a finding, a judicial finding, that the crime fraud exception applied or that the documents were not subject to an attorney-client privilege. Privilege could have been waived, things that were discussed with third parties, non-privilege, or that there was a crime fraud exception. But there's this broader issue, ultimately, when Donald Trump tries to assert this in a motion, which is going to happen fairly soon, where Trump's going to argue that the special counsel office has unlawfully violated Donald Trump's attorney-client privilege. Here's what I think special counsel Jack Smith argues. One, that's ridiculous and absurd. A judge order that these documents be turned over. 2, Donald Trump talks about these things publicly, or these statements were made with people who were not acting in the capacity of Donald Trump's legal counsel. 3, the crime fraud exception applies to any of the documents the special counsel's office has. But then there's this other argument that I think they're going to raise, which is the waiver of attorney-client privilege, that Alina Habba and Donald Trump's lawyers go on TV and talk about their case. And they talk about their private conversations. And that's just not something that's supposed to happen. Like, oh, Donald Trump is getting very worried about, has told me this, he said this, Donald Trump has said that. All of that can be construed as a waiver of the attorney-client privilege. Let me give you some other examples here where Alina Habba has talked about what Donald Trump has told her. Donald Trump, this is in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case, where she talks about private legal strategy with Donald Trump. And she says that Donald Trump has said he's going to testify, and then Donald Trump doesn't testify. But it's still revealing client confidences about whether or not what the legal strategy is going to be. Or play this clip.
He is so firmly against what is happening in this court and so firmly for the old America that we know, not this America, that he will take that stand on Monday. He will open himself up to whatever they want because he's not afraid. People that are afraid cower. President Trump doesn't cower. We'll be back on Monday.
And here's another example of Alina Habba saying that Trump will testify before the January 6th committee when he was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, again, revealing publicly a private communication. Play this clip.
He's got a couple options here. He can ignore the subpoena and maybe run into a Bannon world, or he can go and plead the fifth, or he can go and testify. Any idea what you think he's going to do, and what would you recommend?
I would recommend that he cooperate, because when you have nothing to hide, that's what I always recommend. The same reason that he always comes out and speaks on any of my cases. He has no issue being deposed, even though the left-wing media would like to pretend that he does. He has no issue being subpoenaed and answering questions about what happened that day, and he shouldn't. What he did was very public, and it was really nothing other than to say to go out peacefully, as we know.
I could show you a lot of other examples in the Mar-a-Lago case and the New York Attorney General. So she does it all the time. I mean, you see all the video clips we play of Alina Habba where she says over and over, Donald Trump said this, Donald Trump and I talked about that, Donald Trump. So I think that there will be a waiver argument on the issue of attorney-client privilege. And I think that that kind of continued, statements will continue to get Trump in trouble. And there's a reason why you don't see on TV Chris Kise. There's a reason why you don't, one of Trump's lawyers, you don't see Susan Nicholas, Donald Trump's lawyer from the Manhattan district, in the Manhattan district attorney case, the criminal defense lawyer there. You saw John Lauro talking about the strategy early on. Remember all those videos of John Lauro saying that here's what we're going to do, or here's where. Play this clip.
Start with this. Is the defense to this indictment he didn't do it, or he was allowed to do what he did?
The defense is quite simple. Donald Trump, President Trump, believed in his heart of hearts that he had won that election. And as any American citizen, he had a right to speak out under the First Amendment. He had a right to petition governments around the country, state governments, based on his grievances that election irregularities had occurred. He had every right to speak about the important issues that were taking place after the election. Certainly, Mr. Pence, his vice president, agreed with him that there were anomalies and discrepancies in the election process. And Mr. Trump had every right to petition government and enforce his First Amendment rights. That's why this indictment is an attack on the First Amendment. The government, the Biden administration, would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump did not believe that he had won the election. They will never be able to do that. And that's why this prosecution is so ill-conceived.
And by the way, John Lauro saying those things was like you haven't seen him on really since then, have you, right? That was a gift to Special Counsel Jack Smith, because Special Counsel Jack Smith's been citing all that stuff that Lauro said in all of his motions. And look, Lauro said this, Lauro said that. He said they're ready. He said this is what their defense was going to be. Look what Trump's lawyers have said publicly. That has all found its way into all of Special Counsel Jack Smith's brief. So setting aside the issue of waiver as well, Donald Trump's lawyers have given Jack Smith and have given the prosecutors a treasure trove of evidence. It's never a good thing when the lawyers are the ones giving the key facts to be used against your client by prosecutors. But over and over and over again, that's what we're seeing that they're doing, because they're playing for the audience. They're playing for the PR. And then, of course, you have Alina Habba, who then shows up and goes, oh, it's Jack Smith who likes the press. Here, remember this? Play this clip.
They love having pressers. They love having press conferences. Jack Smith, they love having press conferences, getting in front, having their moment. It's almost a narcissistic.
He said that on a podcast a day ago, 2 days ago. And it's all projection and confession. And it's just really strange. But the good news is that, you get the lawyers that you deserve. That's an expression. And Donald Trump, the blowhard, the crook, the corrupt, the financial fraud, all this, Donald Trump's behavior has alienated credible lawyers, and now he's got the worst of the worst who, engage in this conduct. So it's a dynamic that he deserves. So there you have it. I'm Ben Meiselas. This is the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2 million subscribers thanks to your support. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch and have a great day.
Hey Midas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.